9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Live from Nottingham, this is the Saturday Lunch with Tom Hopkins Burke on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hey up, me duck. It's Saturday, it's 1 p.m, and this is the Saturday Lunch with Tom Hopkins Burke. In the next 90 minutes, we'll be talking about using debate in the classroom and when it's time to stop talking as a teacher. This is your show, so give me your views. Listen on Podbean or call in and win a Teachers Talk Radio mug. Tune in, talk it out, live on Podbean. This is Teachers Talk Radio.
Live from Nottingham, this is the Saturday Lunch with Tom Hopkins Burke on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
We are live and we are ready to go. Welcome to the Saturday Lunch on Teachers Talk Radio. My name is Tom Hopkins Burke, and over the course of the next 90 minutes, we'll be talking about using debate in the classroom to aid teaching and learning, and when teacher talk is just too much teacher talk. Last week, I was joined by my colleague Lawrence Pryor, a teacher of sociology and criminology, to discuss his experience supervising the EPQ. We spoke about the process and the product of the EPQ, how supervisors could support students, what makes a successful EPQ, and we reminisced over three of Lawrence's favourite EPQs from times gone by. We also had Joe Marucci on the show, initially to talk about teaching top set English as a non-specialist drama teacher with the added barrier of dyslexia, and the conversation morphed into teaching more generally with dyslexia, how we can support not only dyslexic students, but also dyslexic colleagues. We learned a lot from our conversation with Joe, and I'm sure we will be hearing from him again sooner rather than later. On today's show, I'm joined by Dr. Rachel Whitbread, a history teacher and EPQ coordinator. We'll be talking about debating in schools. How can we do it, and how does it benefit students? Then in part 2, when is teacher talk too much teacher talk, and how do we make it more effective? I'm going to be reading out your texts and your tweets, so keep on commenting and keep on listening. You can share your thoughts on the show live using the Podbean app. The Saturday Lunch is live every Saturday between 1 and 2:30 p.m. and you can text in your views or call in to make your voice heard by clicking on one of the call-in icons. We are also now live streaming the vast majority of shows via Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. So the usual weekly big shout out to our stream team managed by Nicola Arkinstall. If you're listening via Twitter, via Facebook or via YouTube, then a very good afternoon to you. And of course, if you're listening back via our website, ttradio.org/listen back, via Podbean, via Spotify, or via Apple Podcasts, then a warm welcome to you today. If you want to interact directly with myself and with Rachel, then download the Podbean app, subscribe to Teachers Talk Radio, and get calling in and texting in live. Please also tweet us at TT Radio 2021 with the hashtag TT Radio with your thoughts on the show, whether you're listening live or listening back. As I am the main Twitter admin, I always look forward to reading your comments, and of course, any constructive criticism or suggestions for improvement are totally welcome too. We have a special prize for the best caller today, so do keep on listening until the very end, because I will be handing out a very special Teachers Talk Radio mug. To call in, you need to press one of those call-in icons or the phone icon down the bottom of your screen. You need to bring your headphones to avoid any echo issues and get ready to participate in today's little quiz question. If you weren't listening last week, I asked how long the EPQ essay is meant to be, and the answer was 5,000 words. And even though our guest Lawrence Pryor let that slip in last week's show, we had no winners. Today, we're not going to roll over that question because I've given you the answer, but I have a different question. If you can call in and give me the right answer, you will win a Teachers Talk Radio mug. The question is, what was the most popular A-level subject by the number of entries in 2020? Is it A, history, B, maths, C, geography, or D, psychology? Okay, just have a think about that. I'm going to give you a little bit of thinking time. Here it is again. What was the most popular A-level subject by the number of entries in 2020? A, history, B, maths, C, geography, or D, psychology? Call in with the correct answer and win yourself that Teachers Talk Radio mug. The competition is running until the very end of the show. You have until 2:30 p.m. to call in and give me the correct answer. In the meantime, though, I'm going to play you the latest education news, read by our weekend newsreader, Joe Fox. Do let me know your views on the news by texting in to the live studio while you're listening to Joe's Weekend Bulletin.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your Teachers Talk Weekend News. In the latest report from Public Health England, schools and universities are the most common setting for coronavirus-19 outbreaks. According to a Sky News report, the rapid spread of the Delta variant is linked to a surge in infection rates across the UK. Until the end of May, schools and universities consistently accounted for the majority of outbreaks, although for the week ending 28th of May, there was a 39% decrease, coinciding with a recent half-term holiday. Public Health England data suggests that in the week starting 19th of May, more than 10,000 incidents occurred, with over half happening in educational settings for under 18s. The increased infection rates across the UK has led to a delay in further easing of restrictions initially planned in England for the 21st of June. Primary schools in Britain are set to have higher quality PE lessons and better opportunities from next year. On Thursday, Education Secretary Gavin Williamson announced investment of £320 million as the PE and sport premium continues to be funded. The plan will encourage children to play more sport and improve their physical activity in a bid to combat the after effects of lockdowns linked to the COVID-19 pandemic. Schools have also been given the chance to spend any leftover or unspent funds from the previous 2 years.
Thanks to Joe there for the news. If you're interested in having your own news bulletin, then please DM us at TT Radio 2021 on Twitter. We still have availability for hosting your own show too. So if you want to sign up for a 2-show trial, please email teacherstalkradio@gmail.com. And a member of the executive team will send you an information pack. I'm just going to say a big good afternoon to everybody who has joined the studio so far today. Tom Rogers has shared the live show. Good afternoon, Tom. We've got David Cunningham. Good afternoon, David. We've got Sobia. Good afternoon, Sobia. Tim Kem Commando. Afternoon, Tim. We've got Cruz Nancy. Lesson Copy's in as well. Hi, Lesson Copy, and a few other people as well who I don't recognise, but do tell us where you're listening from this afternoon. And also, if you're a teacher, what do you teach? Primary, secondary? Do you have a particular subject? Would love to hear from our listeners too. Very interesting to hear about the PE and sport premium to get children to play more sport and get fit after being stuck at home in COVID. Sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? You know, but at Teachers Talk Radio, we're always on the lookout for a variety of views. So maybe you think it doesn't sound like a good idea. Should more money be spent on improving students' physical education? Or should the money be spent on other areas like mental health and well-being, music and the arts, even maths and English? Or is it not a zero-sum game? Can we invest in all of these areas which are most important for a child? This is your show. You are my listeners. So do call in, text in, tweet us. Let me know what you think. Before I introduce today's guest, let me just remind you about today's quiz question. What was the most popular A-level subject by the number of entries in 2020? Is it A, history, B, maths, C, geography, or D, psychology? If you call in with the correct answer, you will win a Teachers Talk Radio mug. So press one of those call-in icons and give me the correct answer. Is it A, history, B, maths, C, geography, or D, psychology? The most popular A-level subject by the number of entries in 2020. Oh, we've got somebody at the door, I think. I think that might be our guest for today. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Rachel Whitbread to the show. Alongside her current roles as a history teacher and EPQ coordinator, Rachel has taught debating in schools in Bermuda and Hong Kong on behalf of the English Speaking Union, and that's schools across the UK. She's also led courses on teaching through debate at various institutions, including the University of York, a great university, if I say so myself. I spent 4 years there, including my history PGCE. Of course, other universities and other PGCEs and routes into teaching are available. Welcome to the show, Rachel. How are you today?
Hi, Tom. It's great to be here. I'm really well, thank you.
Fantastic. So you have extensive experience of using debate in schools. So in very simple terms, really, why use debate in the classroom?
Well, I think the headline is that it's a fun, engaging task and it's student-led. So I know that the other topic you're talking about today is teacher talk. Well, debate really puts the emphasis on student talk. And that's something that, I love to put in my lessons, and I love to facilitate going in other lessons. I think in a wider sense, debate gives students a voice. It gives them an opportunity to explore issues that they may not have considered before, or that they can consider in different ways. It gives them a safe space to explore controversial topics, or maybe just topics that they wouldn't otherwise get a chance to interact with. It helps them develop their opinions about issues and to value different opinions as well, to expose them to different points of view, to interact with those points of view. And therefore, they're learning from each other. They're helping one another develop their skills and their ideas. And I think that's something that, is fantastic to see in the classroom.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, we're talking about talk now, and we're going to be talking about talk later on Teachers Talk Radio. We're all about talk today. So if we take debate, if we sort of take debate back to sort of the very start, and you're thinking about an opportunity where you're going to use debate in the classroom, and you've got students in front of you, some of whom might be used to debating and some of whom might never have been involved in sort of this theatre and this drama of debate. How do we go about instructing students to prepare for a classroom debate?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing to do is start to build the skills necessary for debate into everyday standard lessons, whether that's encouraging students to explain and justify their ideas through advanced questioning, or through activities like If I Ruled the World, which is a real favorite of debate teachers. So basically students are asked, if they ruled the world, what one thing would they do? And then other students or the teacher can press them to justify that decision as global ruler. Or you might encourage things like Just a Minute or word association games to get students practicing thinking on their feet and justifying and elaborating on their ideas. So I think the first thing is, don't necessarily see debate as something that you need to teach as a special debate lesson. A lot of the skills can be integrated into lots of other debates too. And then I think the next thing is to start thinking about the topic and the purpose of the debate that you want to hold. If the purpose is to get students revising or revisiting material that they've already been taught, then maybe have a think about how you can give them time to access their notes, to prepare for the debate, and then really start getting them thinking about what format of debate you would like to have. Are you going to have something that's incredibly formal, where students give very defined length speeches? Are you going to allow questions or participation from an audience? Or are you going to run it on a much more informal basis, where students are encouraged to participate when they want to, when they've got something to contribute? So I think those are all questions that you need to ask before you start planning the debate into your scheme of work or into your lesson.
Fantastic. So a lot of room to prepare there. I really like the idea of Just a Minute. I reckon I could do a nice little Teachers Talk Radio Just a Minute special where we get some guests. And I can see that Joe Marucci's in the studio. He was with me last week. Afternoon Joe, and B. Shuna, I think that's one of my colleagues. Hi, Shuna. Yeah, and so get some guests on and we can talk about anything in education for 1 minute without hesitation, without repetition, without deviation. You've just given me a brilliant show idea. Thinking about, it's all right, Joe, you're not late. We're just, no, actually, you're a little bit late, but it doesn't really matter. You know, we've got another hour and 15 minutes, so sit tight and enjoy the ride. In terms of debate in the classroom, then, there's a big thing about skills and knowledge, and it's a false dichotomy, really, especially in history. But if we just take skills and knowledge one by one, what skills does debate in the classroom develop?
Sure. I think the first skill it really emphasizes is the ability of students to research, and perhaps to research better quality resources than you find on a quick Google search. Other search engines are available. I think it really gives students an opportunity to explore issues, to research issues, to question the resources that they're using, to start using those critical thinking skills in resource access, as well as when interacting with the other team in the debate. So research and critical thinking, I think, are headline skills. Also, of course, you know, no debater is an island. Most debates operate on a system of teamwork. So I think, again, that the skills of interacting with teammates, as well as interacting with other opinions or views in a respectful but critical way, is really important. I think there are other really applicable skills, particularly for GCSE A-level students once they get to sixth form, about note-taking. I think it's remarkable the number of students who, particularly when they start debating in class, think that they've got to read out a pre-prepared speech word for word. And I think actually trying to encourage them to take notes that are developed enough that they can use some really complex ideas or some really specific examples, but also that don't just mean they're reading out something word for word. I think that note-taking skill is something that my A-level history students often find really difficult, especially when it comes to public speaking or debating, where they find themselves really dependent on a script, and trying to break them away from that is a fantastic skill to take into any presentation they give, any job interview they do. So encouraging that as a skill is also really, really crucial.
Great. So that's sort of the skills aspect. And then if we think about perhaps debates in particular subject areas, and, you know, we've got people in the studio from a wide range of subjects. Joe, drama, Shuna, science, Tom Rogers in history, we've got geography, we've got more science. I'm just scrolling up to see what we've got business. We've got all sorts of students. We've got all sorts of subjects. We've even got primary. How does debate help students with their knowledge in that particular subject area? How does it help them to remember things? How does it help to consolidate and to sort of, you know, help them with their knowledge in that sense?
Yes, I think there's really two sides to this. One is teaching through debate. So getting students to research an issue or a topic that you haven't covered yet in class. It can be a great way to lead into a new topic. getting students to do maybe some independent research as a homework task, talking about it in the lesson, seeing what ideas they can bring to the table before you launch into a new topic. At the other end of the scheme of work is debate as a revision tool. So getting students to approach a topic they've finished in a completely different way can be a really lovely way of getting them to revise collaboratively and practice their knowledge in a different way to how they might have done it in their structured lessons. I mean, I think one of the real strengths of debating as a classroom practice is that it can be so adaptable to different subjects, to different schemes of work and topic areas. I mean, it always seems to get kind of placed on the humanities, history, politics, English side of the curriculum. But I also find it a fantastic resource amongst my science colleagues at school and in previous jobs. They've been able to explore ethical debates, something that perhaps they don't have time in their curriculum to cover, but that they want students to engage with. Animal testing is a really popular one amongst the students that come to my debate club. They're really passionate about that within science, and that gives them an opportunity to explore that. It might be another ethical issue or an issue that affects the scientific community, like genetic engineering or nuclear power. So I think debate is so versatile that it lends itself to loads of different subject areas and topic areas, and that's the real strength of it.
I think that's really, really fascinating to hear, and I hadn't really thought about debate in science, certainly. And anybody listening live in the studio or on social media, do tweet us, do text in with how you have used debate in the classroom to date, and any ideas which you're sort of picking up from this discussion and conversation between myself and Rachel. Do feel free, of course, to call in and ask Rachel any questions that you might have as well. But yeah, thinking about debate, then we've talked about the skills and knowledge and how we prepare for debate. One of the things which I've been focusing on in my teaching at the moment is, in certainly the last 12 months, has been ratio and ensuring that as many students are thinking hard for as long in the lesson as possible. And I think it comes from Teach Like a Champion. And one of the things which I worry about with a debate is you're going to have some students who take ownership, who are going to, and it can very quickly, in a class of 20, become 3 or 4 students dominating the debate. And you've got students who, yes, they may not be used to speaking, they may be anxious, but who either take a back seat through choice or because they just feel like they can't get a word in. So how do we get all students to participate in a class debate?
Yeah, this can always be a problem. I mean, I think debating, whilst it can put parameters around a more talkative student, perhaps, you know, they've got 6 minutes or 2 minutes to contribute, as opposed to often dominating an entire class discussion. It also puts those parameters in place for the quieter students. And some quieter students, I think, respond to that really well. You know, they've got 30 seconds of protected time to voice their opinion and not face any form of comeback from other students in the room. And some quiet students seem to respond to that really well. Others are understandably completely overwhelmed by the idea of speaking even a couple of sentences with the whole class listening to them. So I think really to try and encourage all students to participate is to build in these debate skills into whole class activities. And to perhaps view debate as not necessarily something that needs to be formal, that needs to only include 4 speakers or 6 speakers at the front of the room. I mean, those formal debates can be fantastic, and the role of the audience then can be a very active one. Just because a student is not necessarily one of the chosen few at the front of the room speaking, those students might be thinking about critical questions to ask in an audience question time afterwards, or they might be coming up with written rebuttal as a written task, while some students do the debate as a spoken task. So different outcomes can sometimes support quieter students. But also debates themselves can include every member of the room. We use balloon debates a lot in our debating practice. We have a lot of very keen students come to our debate club in school, and it's frustrating for a lot of them if they're not given a chance to speak or participate in a formal debate where only 4 or 6 of them might. So we use balloon debates. These are a great exercise for a whole class. They can very much expand to include any number of students. The basic premise, it's a little bit grisly. The class, the number of participants are in a hot air balloon. The hot air balloon is sinking. So some participants of the debate have to be thrown out of the balloon to save the rest. I warned you, it was a bit grisly. The students play different roles. So they're not students throwing other students from the balloon. They might be, in a fun sense, different cartoon characters, arguing why their cartoon character deserves to survive and another cartoon character deserves to be thrown from the balloon. In a more serious academic context, it might be different leaders at Versailles. It might be different countries in the UN debating a global issue. It could be, I don't know, different planets in the solar system debating what their various merits and problems are. So this could involve any number of students. Obviously, you give them much shorter time limits for participation. So perhaps you ask them each for a 1-sentence comment or a 30-second comment. And it gives all students a chance to participate. And the quieter student who would definitely not volunteer to be a team at the front of the room can suddenly participate on an equal basis to everyone else from their own seat, perhaps even working with a partner to come up with ideas. So that can be a really nice way to involve everyone.
Yeah, I really like balloon debates. I remember doing one when I trained as a history teacher, and we were in, pre-COVID times, and we were sort of sat in our room, and we were all given a different individual or event or group which might be counted within a Key Stage 3 curriculum, and we had to justify its merit and justify its importance. And I think there were about 22 of us in the room, and we could only have 7 which remained on the curriculum. And I was given Solidarity, the Polish trade union at the end of the Cold War, and I had to justify Solidarity in comparison to, say, the Black Death and Henry VIII and other things as well. And somehow Solidarity managed to stay in the balloon and had a safe landing, not thrown out. But yeah, I really like the idea of balloon debates, and I'm now thinking about my A-level history class and thinking about the causes of the February Revolution or something like that, and thinking, how many causes can they come up with, and can they justify why they're the most important? And then that might be nice to think about, sort of linking and analysing and evaluating some of those. So yeah, some really good ideas. And of course, if you're listening in the studio, do tell us what you think. If you've got any questions, please do ask them. Joe Marucci has texted in. My partner has said her teacher used to give the whole class a topic, have them write their opinion on a paper aeroplane, then throw it to someone else to start discussion. It sounds like my idea of hell, but could be cool with a right class. Yes, it does. I think it would be good with a right class, but I can just think of a few classes I've taught in the past where that might descend into chaos. I'm not sure what you think there, Rachel.
Yes, absolutely. I would hesitate to give missiles of any type to some of my younger students, it has to be said. But I really like the value of separating a student from an opinion that student personally holds, because that can often give a student confidence to raise an argument they might not otherwise raise. It can stop a student from feeling they're being personally judged when they give an argument and it is refuted. Very often a student feels that they're under personal attack when someone disagrees with their opinion. And if you separate the student and the opinion, it becomes, rather than a personal attack, it becomes an attack on the idea, not the student. So that can work really, really well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So we've spoken about the role students could play in a debate and the types of debates in which they could participate. What role does the teacher play in all of this? Is the teacher there, sort of, a guide on the side, just letting the students go at it? Are they a facilitator? Are they a devil's advocate? Can they play an active role in the debate? What role can and should a teacher be playing within classroom debates?
Yes, I mean, I really think a teacher can be, all of the above. I think that there are some groups where they will really respond well to the position of a devil's advocate teacher in the classroom. There is nothing my students like more than arguing with me and feeling they've got one over on me. In our debate training just this week, we held a debate on whether male and female sports people should be paid the same. And the students came to a consensus surprisingly quickly that whilst in a kind of vacuum that would be great, in reality, they believed that could never work. And they came up with a huge list of reasons why. And because none of the students had felt able to disagree with that, it was the consensus opinion, I played devil's advocate for the first 20 minutes, gave them some ideas about counter arguments to that. And then a couple of the quieter students were kind of supported to come out with their contrary views, which can work really well, teacher as devil's advocate, and it can be a lot of fun, and it really gets students often engaged in the process. Other than that, I think that the basic role that a teacher has to play in debate is not as judge, but as central overseer, whether that's in a formal chairperson role or whether that's actually often better just in setting the parameters for the debate, the rules of the debate, and then modeling the kinds of responses that students should be giving, modeling the questions that students could ask one another. It might be modeling the kind of point, explanation, example structure that you want students to use, or how to critique another student in a respectful way. So I think the teacher can play a huge role in the oversight of the debate, whether it's in a formal way, perhaps with younger students, or in simply laying some ground rules with older students so that it doesn't descend into a shouting match or an argument, which is always liable to happen, I think, with older students.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Just a reminder, of course, to everybody listening that I am giving away a Teachers Talk Radio mug today. All you need to do is call in with the correct answer to this question. What was the most popular A-level subject by the number of entries in 2020? A, history, B, maths, C, geography, D, psychology. What was the most popular A-level subject by the number of entries in 2020? A, history, B, maths, C, geography, or D, psychology. So we've spoken about, you sort of hinted at how you've used debate with different students of different ages. How would you adjust perhaps the parameters of debate? How would you adjust the process of debate according to perhaps the ages of the students or perhaps their prior attainment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd say younger students, or perhaps students who would struggle with the task more, you can start off by providing very structured response frameworks for those students. So it might be the case that before you hold any kind of verbal participation, you get them to complete effectively a sheet framework on points, how you would explain those points. You can put in lots of prompts into that, some examples that students could use. You can get them to find one example when you've evidenced a couple of them. You can therefore kind of really support students who might find this a more challenging exercise. I think you can also engage those students in the process. Students of all ages will appreciate an opportunity to choose a debate topic, or to choose the side of the debate that they argue, or in a balloon debate to choose the character or the aspect of the curriculum that they want to represent. You can also start with a more simple debating framework for younger students or those who might struggle otherwise. So an aisle debate can be a really good exercise for younger students. This is where it's a slightly physical activity. Students stand up in the classroom and face one another in 2 lines. You give them a topic. One side are in support of the topic, one against, and students just each come up with an idea down each line, alternating between the for and the against sides. And it gets them thinking on their feet. It's only one very brief idea they need to contribute. And then you can start building in some extra levels of detail, such as students being able to refute the previous point, as well as add an idea of their own. So I think if you start with very simple exercises like that, students feel then that a bit more confident, a bit more able perhaps to make larger, longer contributions in the class.
Oh, yeah, I like the idea of scaffolding the debate and just giving all students the opportunity to succeed and the opportunity to participate. I really like that. There's this thing which has come about from the EEF, the Education Endowment Foundation, from their literacy report called Accountable Talk. And Accountable Talk can be split into 3 parts. It can be split into accountability to knowledge, i.e. seeking to be accurate and true, accountability to reasoning, providing justifications for claims, and accountability to community, listening and showing respect to others. A debate format sounds like an ideal way in which we can build accountable talk into our lessons. So how would you recommend teachers can demonstrate the importance of perhaps those different types of accountability to knowledge, to reasoning, to community within the parameters of a classroom debate?
Absolutely. I mean, the accountable talk seems to effectively be supporting students to have a real conversation, a conversation that flows 2 ways. And a debate at its core is that. It's often a more formalized conversation than most, but it really does teach students to have those kind of accountable conversations. I think a key way to do this could be for teachers to model phrases that might promote accountable talk or might get students responding in increasingly kind of accountable ways. Things like, what do people think about a particular issue, especially during tutor time? This can be a great way to get students chatting. It could be, what do you think about the school's uniform policy? It could be, what do you think about a news affairs topic? And then you can model for students ways that you might respond to their comments, that students would respond to one another's comments. So I agree, I disagree because, could you explain this slightly more? Does anyone agree that? Are all ways that you could give students model responses to conversation. And then you can start adding in different kinds of responses. So you could talk about supportive comments, where you don't just say yes in response to someone you agree with, but you give a validatory response. So you add a different viewpoint that agrees with the overall idea, or you add a different example to it. And then you can build in contrary comments where students disagree and are offering supports to their disagreement. And you can also get students then to respond to debates, even if they're not participating in them. I mean, a way that I have used it in tutor time and pastoral time in the past is getting students to listen to a TED talk. There are so many of them, and then getting them to come up with either a point that agrees with that talk or a point that disagrees with it. Again, you can get students to write that down initially if you want to give them more scaffolding or preparation time. And really, that just gets students opening a conversation. And especially if it's a conversation with a TED talk, there's no likelihood that that's going to kind of come back on them. And really, that gives them a practice of building up these active conversations with other people, and hopefully scaffolds it for them a little bit too.
Joe says, the question has caused great debate in our household. When do we call in if we have an answer? Is this to a competition, Joe? If it's to a competition, you can call it at any time, absolutely any time between now and 2:30, and I will pause our conversation with Rachel, and you can answer the question for a hope of winning that Teachers Talk Radio mug. I have 2 more questions left with Rachel, but Joe, do feel free to call in, and anybody else as well. If you think you've got an answer to the question, don't let Joe beat you. Call in any time. Oh, Joe has just made it in. Who have we got here? We have got Joe Marucci. Hi, how are you, Joe?
Hello, Tom. Yeah, really good. Are you?
I'm really good, thank you. So
Brilliant.
here is our question. Our question is, what was the most popular A-level subject by the number of entries in 2020? A, history, B, maths, C, geography, or D, psychology? What is your answer?
After a long time debating, we're going to go with maths.
What do you think, Rachel?
This is a really tricky one. I mean, my heart says history, but my head would probably go with psychology.
Oh, I mean, when I did the news on Teachers Talk Radio a fair while ago now, I remember reporting that the number of A-level history entries in history had dropped by 20% in 5 years. Is it B, maths? It is the correct answer, Joe. Congratulations. You have won the Teachers Talk Radio mug. In order to claim your prize, you need to go to ttradio.org and fill out the contact form stating that you have won the mug on the Saturday Lunch with Tom Hopkins Burke, and giving them a postal address to post the mug to. And you will get your mug in 14 to 21 days. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I'm really enjoying the show, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. Again, it was great to have you on last week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. So we have a winner. Congratulations to Joe Marucci, who has won the Teachers Talk Radio mug. Back to debate. What are the common mistakes a teacher might make when they're introducing debate into their classroom, Rachel?
Oh gosh, I think the first thing that can lead to just a disorganized debate or an uncomfortable debate could be not setting the parameters for that debate well. I think I always make sure that before I go into my classroom, I know what activities I'm going to get students to do to build up to the debate, but then I know kind of how long I'm going to get students to speak for, whether I'm going to allow points of information, so interruptions in one another's speeches, or whether they're going to have just wholly protected speeches. And I'll know kind of how long I'm going to ask students to speak for, whether or not there's going to be audience participation. And I may even, on occasion, have an idea of which students I'll ask to participate, although I often do like doing that on either a randomized format or students volunteering for themselves in a more confident group. So I think setting those parameters before the debate starts is really important, and then communicating those to the students. The danger of not having those parameters in place is that the debate becomes sidetracked or derailed by particularly vocal students who really want to get their views across. And then obviously that's at the direct detriment of much quieter students who might not feel confident participating. But also I think a debate, the whole kind of purpose of a debate, if you like, is often to actually confuse issues. Debating brings up lots of different opinions, lots of different ideas, rather than helping students to cement an opinion. I think a debate can actually make students less confirmed, less confident in their own opinions. And I think another big danger of that is that students become confused or a topic becomes muddied. And so as a teacher, I think I always try and make sure that I myself have a concluding task that allows students to reflect on all of that disorganized, disparate ideas and try and just clear the water a little bit and reaffirm their opinion, or note that their opinion has changed and give some reflection on that. And again, I think if that step is missed, students can leave the classroom more confused about a topic, more conflicted about a topic. And especially if it's a revision debate for an exam or an essay that you've set, that can actually then undermine their ability to come out with a clear argument. So I think a reflection at the end and a summary for students to come to their own argued opinion is something else that's quite important to include.
So yeah, so those are some common mistakes, and reflection and summary at the end, I think, is very important for any lesson, really, not just a debate activity. Apart from, say, that reflection and summary, and this may sort of be the reverse of your answer to the previous question, what are your top tips for teachers who are incorporating classroom debates into their practice for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the top one obviously is establish the sorts of rules you want for your debate, work out what format you want for your debate. Is it going to be a small number? Is it going to be a large number? And come up with all those decisions before the lesson. The next thing is to consider how you're going to approach the debate itself. So are you going to start students with activities to get them talking or thinking? Could you start with a just the minute or a word association game? And then really go through 4 key stages to build up for the debate. So the first one is to get students to think of lots and lots of ideas. So part of the process of researching and preparing for a debate is just thinking of every possible point and then selecting the ones that are good and bad. So the first stage is just thinking of ideas. The second stage is organizing those ideas into people's speeches, arguments, placing linked ideas into one speech, for example. The third idea is then structuring speeches. So that's really getting into the nitty-gritty of what examples will students use. Are they linking those examples to the debate and explaining how they demonstrate their side of the debate? And then finally, it's working out how to involve the whole class during the debate. So if you're only having 4 students speaking, what are the other students going to be doing? Is there a way to incorporate them into the debate a bit more? So my approach would always be those 4 steps: thinking of points, organizing your ideas, structuring speeches, and then involving the whole class. And I think those 4 steps just help scaffold my own approach to integrating debate into the classroom. And there are loads of resources available for teachers who maybe haven't used debate before or want some new ideas on using debate. They're available from loads of places like the ESU, DebateMate, and there's a great website called the Noisy Classroom website, which I use quite a lot for lesson ideas, and it can be really useful for colleagues.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. And yeah, you've been an absolutely fantastic guest. Thanks so much to Dr. Rachel Whitbread for coming on to the show. It's fantastic to hear about something which can be so impactful and powerful from an informed and an experienced expert. So thanks so much, Rachel. I'm sure you'll be on the show again at some point in the future, just like Jay was. He was on last week, and now look, he's winning a mug by calling in. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and I'm just going to give you a big round of applause.
Thanks so much, Tom. It's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed having a chat with you.
No problem. This goes on for a while. Thanks so much, Rachel. Have a great rest of the weekend.
Thanks, you too.
We're now going to take a very short break, and then after a break we are going to be talking about when teacher talk is too much teacher talk and how we can make teacher talk more effective. We're just going to take a short break. See you afterwards.
Introducing Amanda Davey. Amanda is one of the first specialist teacher assessors for dyscalculia in the UK and offers dyscalculia tutoring and bespoke training for schools. With 26 years of teaching and tutoring experience in the UK, Amanda offers specialist online tuition focused on building confidence and developing skills. Amanda also offers online and face-to-face training on dyscalculia for educators, informing practitioners as to how to identify children that may have dyscalculia and how to support them in class. Find out more about Amanda and what she can offer you at www.amanda-davy-dyscalculia.co.uk. Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. At Creative Resources, we've been rethinking what a classroom can be. We've created a huge range of more than 2,500 original and exciting resources that span across more than 15 different subject areas. Whether you're looking for primary or secondary level resources, careers options, PSHE, arts, or humanities, Creative Resources have the resources for you. We offer full curriculum packages and unique, challenging escape rooms themed on topics such as Shakespeare, Tudors, and fractions. We have quizzes, task cards, Tarsia puzzles, and lots more. Better still, more than 100 resources can be accessed for free. Just visit our website, www.cre8tiveresources.com. You can get 10% off any order you make on our website by using the discount code TT Radio. Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your Teachers Talk Weekend News.
In the latest report from Public Health England, schools and universities are the most common setting for coronavirus-19 outbreaks. According to a Sky News report, the rapid spread of the Delta variant is linked to a surge in infection rates across the UK. Until the end of May, schools and universities consistently accounted for the majority of outbreaks, although for the week ending 28th of May, there was a 39% decrease, coinciding with a recent half-term holiday. Public Health England data suggests that in the week starting 19th of May, more than 10,000 incidents occurred, with over half happening in educational settings for under 18s. The increased infection rates across the UK has led to a delay in further easing of restrictions initially planned in England for the 21st of June. Primary schools in Britain are set to have higher quality PE lessons and better opportunities from next year. On Thursday, Education Secretary Gavin Williamson announced investment of £320 million as the PE and sport premium continues to be funded. The plan will encourage children to play more sport and improve their physical activity in a bid to combat the after effects of lockdowns linked to the COVID-19 pandemic. Schools have also been given the chance to spend any leftover or unspent funds from the previous 2 years.
Thanks again for the news, Joe. It's great to hear multiple newsreaders on Teachers Talk Radio these days. A shout out, of course, to our regular weekday newsreader, Megan Goods. Megan's also been heavily involved in the Teachers Talk Radio newsletter, which came out earlier today. If you want to subscribe to our Teachers Talk Radio newsletter, go to ttradio.org, scroll down to the bottom where it says subscribe for updates, and enter your full name and your email. In this month's newsletter, you get to meet two of our hosts, the innovative Mira Chudasama and the culinary genius himself, Kyle Graham. There's also a welcome from Tom Rogers, our founder and director. Scott Pusely gives his top teacher hacks, and we have an Agony Aunt feature about unannounced observations and drop-ins with little time for improvement. James Clark also writes about the importance of Pride Month, and Tabitha McIntosh writes lucidly about dual coding as a lethal mutation. There's also a competition, guess the stationery, and you can email teacherstalkradio@gmail.com or message at TTRadio2021 on Twitter for a chance to win another Teachers Talk Radio mug, not just in shows. You can win it for our newsletter too. So if you're yet to subscribe, what are you waiting for? Get involved. Go to ttradio.org and scroll down to the bottom to subscribe to our updates and enjoy even more Teachers Talk Radio content. Our next topic for discussion has caused quite a stir on our social media feeds in the last 24 hours, particularly on our Twitter feed. We asked, as a teacher, have you ever been told to limit how much you talk in a lesson? As of 8:30 this morning, we had 16 retweets, 247 likes, and 140 replies. So many of you were especially keen to answer this question. If you gave us your thoughts on Twitter and you're listening live, why not call in right now and tell us about your experiences of having to limit teacher talk? Have you ever been told to limit how much you talk in a lesson? When was the last time? When I raised this question in my staff room earlier this week, one of my colleagues, who will remain nameless, said it could perhaps confuse the listeners that teachers talk could get too much. May I just clarify for everybody listening live or listening later, you can never have too much Teachers Talk Radio. We have shows every day of the week from dawn till dusk, and you can listen live or listen back at ttradio.org/listen back. But you can't get too much teachers talk, but you can arguably have too much teacher talk. The majority of respondents had been told to limit their teacher talk, and we are going to have a caller live into the studio right now. Good afternoon. Could you please tell us what is your name, where you're calling from, and if you're a teacher, what do you teach?
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear.
This is Ellie.
Hello.
I teach science. I'm an RQT.
Fantastic. And could you tell us about your experiences then of teacher talk? Have you ever been told to limit how much you talk in the classroom?
Yes, plenty of times. But when I saw your tweet yesterday, then it gives me the chance to recall and relay this particular episode of my one of my mentors actually sitting at the back of my classroom. Well, I suppose her classroom, I'd guess, with a timer and timing me for a sequence of lessons.
Wow.
Yeah, with telling me then to the fact that I talk too much. And I think I returned the favor by sitting at the back at one point and timing her back. And realizing that she talked longer than me. And when I brought this to her attention, she said, that was different. That didn't count. Suffice to say, there wasn't really much love lost between us. But I think that one of the problems was that although she told me that I talked too much, she never actually told me why or what the alternatives were. So that was my kind of, I suppose, my issue with all that.
Very, very interesting story. We don't know the full context. We don't know who your mentor was. We don't know how many times you'd been timed or how many times you went to go and time your mentor. But it's still a very interesting story. Is it representative of a wider picture? I don't know. If you're listening live, then has that ever happened to you? Text in, let us know. If you are, you can call in as well. Has it happened to people you know, or is this something which you've managed to avoid so far in your teaching career? But yeah, that was a very interesting anecdote. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So yes, we've got this question, but we've got another caller. We have another caller. Let's see who we've got here. Hello, I think we have got Shuna in the studio. Good afternoon, Shuna. Please just tell us where you're calling from and what you teach.
Hello, Tom. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you loud and clear, Shuna.
Hello. Thanks for having me on the show.
No problem.
I'm a science teacher in Nottingham with you.
Yes.
And this is such an interesting question. And I have some opinions on this, which I hope are grounded in research-informed pedagogy, which is a big passion of mine.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very interested in teaching and learning and CPD at our school, soon to be in evidence lead in education. So I'm hoping to add a bit of an evidence-based answer. So I think what your last caller said was very indicative of what we sort of told sort of 6+ years ago, wasn't it? That we need to limit our teacher talk. I was in fact told when I was a trainee, sort of a rule of thumb of 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, which actually you can't get very much done. You can't get very much talk in that amount of time, can you?
No.
But I think now I'm going to borrow an expression from Professor Rob Coe, who's written some very interesting articles. He talks about the Bananarama principle. And at risk of giving all you and your listeners an earworm for the rest of the day, he says that it's not what you do, it's the way that you do it. So I think it's not just the amount of time, it's how we do it. So how do we make it effective? I think there can be such thing as too much teacher talk. But now that we know that active learning, that discovery learning by problem solving that we were encouraged to get the students to do years ago, now that we know that's not the best way, and that we, the experts at our subjects, should be teaching them, now that we know that, well, we can allow ourselves to talk, but it has to be effective. So we need to make sure that we deliver our teacher talk so to ensure we have the students' attention.
Brilliant. So I'm just going to interrupt you there, Sheena. I've just seen that Jasmine Lane is in the studio, one of my former guests. Good afternoon, Jasmine. If you want to call in and help us talk about how much teacher talk is too much teacher talk and how we can make it more effective, please call in. I see Fiona Miller. Now, if that is the British journalist Fiona Miller, then a very good afternoon to you. Wow, I feel honoured. And we've also got Henry Burke and Charrier London as well. Jasmine, are you here?
I think so.
Fantastic, and I can hear you as well, Jasmine. What do you think about this? How when is teacher talk too much teacher talk, and how do we make it more effective?
I think the simplest way to think about it is if students aren't having to do something with what you're telling them, then that's too much teacher talk. Like if you're just talking because you're like on a tangent that you really enjoy, which is great. Like that's why we love our subjects, but after a certain amount of time, like even kids that are interested might just kind of their minds might start to go other places. So it's important. I don't know the first name of the other person who's on the call, but
yeah, Sheena.
What she was saying about like making it effective by like, do a turn and talk, or just saying like stop and think, and then asking them a question, and then you can carry on. I think it's also important to differentiate between primary and secondary school, because smaller kids have a more difficult time paying attention for longer things, and they forget things faster. So, keeping that in mind that it changes as you grow.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Jasmine. And yeah, this links in quite nicely to what Sheena was just about to say about making sure we have our kids' attention. So how do we get our kids to pay attention to our talk to make it effective?
Yeah, I love what Jasmine was just saying about turn and talk. Strategies like that can definitely help to keep their attention. If I'm a fan of the memory model, Tom. So looking at making sure that teachers understand that we need to have the students' attention for the information to get into their working memory. So we can do things like turn and talk, some think, pair, share, those Kagan structures where they have that accountability. We expect them to discuss things and to be called upon. We can use cold call. If we're expecting students to be picked upon without putting their hand up, then they need to pay attention. They expect to be asked a question. And then questioning strategies like question tennis, passing the question around the room. What do you think? Was he right in saying that? Can you think of any disadvantages to that answer? So that it's very dialogic. Pritesh Raichura has a really good research ed video on this, actually. Planning effective teacher-led lessons I've written down here. So yeah, there's lots of ideas on how to make our teacher talk effective, which is really worth exploring. I would say that I'm afraid I am guilty of being one of those mentors of a trainee a couple of years ago. I did actually time her teacher talk. Yes, but it was because, thinking about it, reflecting on that, actually, it was because it wasn't the length of the teacher talk. It was because it was taking away from other valuable aspects of the lesson. So practice for the students, time to actually consider what they'd learned from her excellent modelling and description and explaining, and actually put it on paper and think about it and do questions. Retrieval practice. We don't want to take away time from the lesson from valuable activities like that. So
Thank you,
giving them-
thank you, Sheena. Yeah, definitely some really interesting points there about just making sure. Well, actually, yes, sometimes teacher talk is too much, isn't it? Because it can sometimes get in the way of actually getting the students to do things. Would be interested, Jasmine, to hear that in terms of getting that right balance between talk and practice. How do we get the right balance, Jasmine?
I think it depends where you are in your content. Like at the beginning of a unit, I know that I talk a lot more than I give them time to do independent practice, just because they're still building up their own mental models of whatever book I'm teaching. And so if I like don't talk at all and I just ask a bunch of questions, like I haven't really taught anything yet. So when I think about like the I, we, you model, in maths, I think that it's a little bit simpler, but for English, it's like at the beginning of a novel, I'm doing a lot more. In the middle, I'm pushing it more to be more dialogic, because I'm having you start to do more of the thinking. And then at the end, I mean, I really don't have to say that much at all because they can do the thinking necessary. I think it was Robert Marzano. He has a book where he says like no more than 5 minutes of teacher talk, but like, I don't think you can put a number on it. I think it depends where you are in a unit, what strategies you're doing, to speed up the pacing and things like that.
Yeah, I think timing and actually putting a sort of designating a specific percentage or proportion of the lesson where you're allowed to talk, I think that's particularly unhealthy because it's got to be driven by the context of the lesson, where it comes into a sequence. I mean, yesterday afternoon I was teaching year 12. It's the first lesson of their new unit, okay, which they're going to be doing in year 13. And that was extremely heavily teacher-led because they're looking at things which they've never even really thought about before. And certainly as they go through the rest of year 12 and into year 13, they're going to get a bit more practice and they're going to be a bit more independent. But in that early stage, we're the experts and we've just got to really make the most of that. Sheena, how can we use sort of explicit direct instruction for effective teacher talk?
Well, I think from what I've read and seen, it's about having that dialogue. So the questioning, you can even do call and response, the choral repetition of things. So the other day I had my students saying the word nucleus. I know it sounds silly, but they can't spell it correctly. So I think if they can say it, nucleus, and you say it, nucleus, and use your hands and get them a gesture, get them to repeat it back. So it's engaging. You have hands up for questions. You don't just have them calling out, but you make it dialogic. You invite them into the conversation about what you're saying, as well as then obviously you're good drawing under the visualizer, modeling, explaining things through carefully. So yeah, effective teacher-led lessons don't have to be just like a lecture. They are dialogic. That's my understanding. There's more on the internet about that, from particularly this Pritesh Raichura video. I'd really recommend that.
Brilliant, thanks, Sheena. And yeah, Jasmine, how can you? I mean, you've given us some ideas. Would you like to add anything to that on how we can make sort of teacher-led lessons a bit more dialogic, a bit more interactive, perhaps?
I mean, I think that my teacher-led lessons are interactive because I'm checking for understanding all the time, and I think if you look at Adam Boxer's videos, I know he's in chemistry and science, but he's asked something like 62 questions in one lesson or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's in checking for understanding doesn't have to be a big, like long 15-minute pause, right? It can just be a quick 30-second, 20 seconds, turn and tell your neighbor what's the answer, cold call on someone, move on. So you don't want your checks for understanding to like slow down the pace. That's something to also keep in terms of like thinking of attention. The pace of your lesson has to move along pretty quickly because it's harder to pay attention for students. Like they're not being paid to be there. They kind of just have to, and they probably just want to talk with their mates anyway. So you got to do something to keep the pace up. And that the questioning really helps in that regard.
Yeah, really, really good advice there. I mean, as a term, and I'm not sure what you think as well, Sheena, I don't particularly like the word pace. I think it sort of suggests sort of, a very arbitrary sort of way of going through your lessons. And I think sometimes sometimes you do have to slow it down a bit, and sometimes you do have to take your time to explain things. But I completely agree at the same time with what Jasmine's saying about actually you're checking for understanding. It does need to be quite fast paced in order sort of to assess the understanding of as many students as possible, and to just not sort of completely, turn your lesson into, a completely different pace. I don't know what you think about that, Sheena. Any ideas, any thoughts?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point you make about pace. I don't think I've ever actually thought about that it could be a bad thing. I mean, maybe in contrast to I really agree with what Jasmine said about checking for understanding. We need to have those quick snapshots and keep the class on their toes. But then sometimes you might need to slow it down. So I think it's Tom Sherrington talks about this technique called silence is golden, where you slow it down and just insist on silence and have them work for those, 5 minutes that you time. So then the pace would go down and the noise would go down. It doesn't feel so intense. So that's important too. So it depends on your context and your activities. Yes, the pace might need to change and be dynamic with the knowledge, with the teaching.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sheena. And one final question for you, Jasmine. Have you ever been told to talk less as a teacher?
I haven't really. So it probably will reflect poorly on the United States, but I haven't really received any instructional feedback in 2 years of teaching.
Wow.
So no.
Well, and I mean, you're what, Jasmine? You're in your second year of
this is the
qualified
end
of your second year, so just same as me. I mean, I was observed yesterday, and that was my third observation of the year. So and I got some quality feedback from that. So you've had very little. Oh, we got another caller. Incredible. We're getting all the callers on today in Teachers Talk Radio. I'm loving it. Who have we got here? We have got Henry Burke, 10. Hello, Henry. Could you just tell, I think we know your name. It's Henry Burke. Can you tell us where you're calling from? And if you're a teacher, what do you teach?
Hi, guys. Just to check, can you hear me, first of all?
I can hear you loud and clear, Henry. Perfect.
Wonderful. So I'm a history teacher. I work in a school in Southeast London, and I'm just joining in because I saw the debate on Twitter last night and everyone's responses, and I chipped in, and here I am now. And this was a conversation I had recently with a friend who is also a history teacher, and he works in a private school in Southwest London, which is renowned for its academic results and getting kids into Oxbridge. And I was talking to him about the concept of direct instruction and how I was becoming a bit more in favour of it recently. And he said to me, to a certain extent, I expect that I should be able to say things to kids and they remember it. And this was something I was kind of grappling with recently, and this is why it interested me so much on Twitter, because I don't really know what to make of it. And I think in history, there's a definite benefit to beginning the lesson with an element of the story and saying, okay, today, guys, we're looking at 1066. Here's a quick 5-minute overlay of the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and, effectively tell them the story. But I think that the way I'm adapting this now in my practice is to, if I do tell them the story, then whatever I tell them has to be provided for them in like a written format. So some kind of guided reading sheet where they read along with me or something like that. And I take them through the story and so on and so forth. But I don't know. I think if my friend in the independent sector were to take his idea of telling kids things and they remember it to the state sector, I wonder how that would go down with certain members of staff in the state sector. But I don't know also.
Yeah, really interesting thought. Really interesting thoughts, Henry. Thank you. And I really like this idea about stories as well. And that's, as a history teacher, I think it's really important. And it links into a lot of what Willingham says about narrative and storytelling. And I think good stories, I've literally just found what Willingham says. He says that stories are easy to comprehend and easy to remember. And that's true not just because people pay close attention to stories. There is something inherent in the story format that makes them easy to understand and remember. Teachers can consider using the basic elements of story structure to organise lessons and introduce complicated material, even if they don't plan to tell a story in class. So yeah, I think storytelling as a way of imparting information can be particularly powerful and can help to, to increase the effectiveness of teacher talk. I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on that, Sheena?
On stories, yeah, something I'd really love to explore more in my practice. I actually observed a lesson years ago before I trained to be a teacher. It was a physics lesson, and it was a 40-minute long lesson. And for the whole time, the very skilled physics teacher sat the group around one big circular table, about 15 children, with a slinky, and it was to teach waves. And they had the students interact within this story of waves. And well, what's the wavelength? What's the frequency? How can we show it with this slinky? And it was very linked towards a story or sort of a narrative of what is a wave and what do we know about them and how we model the Mexican wave. So it was building up, kind of like building up a story, maybe a bit loosely linked to what you were saying there, but it was a way in which teacher talk was sustained through a lesson to be really engaging. And I think the kids loved it. They didn't have to write anything either.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sheena. And yeah, over to you, Jasmine. I mean, from your experience, you must have lots of experience of using stories, you know, from your practice. Have you found them to be particularly effective in terms of getting students to remember stuff?
I mean, yeah, like in English, like the story is the thing that we talk about every day, at least in my class. I know some of my colleagues maybe take like a skills approach. Like today we're going to look at like assessment objective 2 is like what some people will do here in the States with like, you know, our standards. But if you just ask questions about what's going on in the story, then kids remember that. But then also the idea of like, the reason that we latch onto stories is because like it situates itself into like our schema. So I'm thinking of like cognitive load theory. You know, we remember, what does Willingham say? We learn new things in the context of what we already know. So stories is something that we are very familiar with. So it's easier to at least get hooked on in that way. You know, I don't know if like engaging is the word that I like to use, because like, even if my students are sitting in silence, like they're engaged because I'm having them do something with whatever I taught them. But yeah, I mean, like Tabitha McIntosh talked about that this week. She talked about stories. It was fabulous.
Oh yeah, Tabitha's got a fantastic show on a Tuesday breakfast show. I mean, Jasmine, you stay up until past 1 a.m. in the States to listen to Tabitha's show. That's how good it is. And it's always it's not always laugh a minute, but it certainly makes you think and it makes you react, and that's a great thing about Tabitha's shows. Henry, yeah, in terms of stories, then, are there any particular stories in your teaching of history which stand out to you, which the kids remember once you've taught it to them?
1066 and the Battle of Hastings, I think, is one which kids really find very engaging. The story of the Saxon shield wall at the top of the hill and the Norman cavalry at the bottom. And in fact, I'm in the process of marking Year 7 end of year exam papers. And you can see with some kids or students that stories really grip them. And in fact, they're writing the narrative of the history, which is to an extent what we want them to do. We want them to be able to understand the narrative of that battle and understand why it went the way it went. And I think, you know, as my teaching develops and I become more knowledgeable in certain pockets of history, I'm sure I'll uncover different stories which particularly strike a note with students. But that's something which has just come to light in light of my Year 7 exam papers. And I can see that they do know the story of Hastings very well. And I guess it kind of links into, you know, we've seen changes in, this is very history specific, but Michael Gove, when he reformed the history curriculum, from what I understand.
One second. We've got a Michael Gove, so we've got to do the carry on.
Apologies. Well, I understand from what he did, he wanted students to have a chronological narrative of the island of Britain from 800 to 2000. And I think to an extent, narrative is a useful thing. They need to understand the story of the history. But it's perhaps a lower level skill when compared to argument or analysis or something like that. But yeah, 1066 is one which leaps off the page. And to clarify, I'm not a fan of Michael Gove. It's just something I've been looking at recently.
It's fine,
but,
absolutely fine.
Apologies.
I think personally, I mean, as history teachers, when Gove reformed the history curriculum, or tried to in 2013, 98% of the HA would disapproving of his changes. On the other hand, you look at some of the more sort of generic things in education. You know, some people I know, both some hosts on Teachers Talk Radio, like Kyle Graham, are particularly big fans of academisation and what that's done in terms of schools as well. And I think you can look at Gove on two sides of the coin. But whenever we're talking about history and Gove in a sentence, I think you know. I mean, there are 2% of teachers out there who do like Gove, and fair enough. If you care, then yeah, please do call in. And there are many different sides as well, and it's not all just negativity, I think. But history and Gove, typically, I mean, there are very few history teachers out there with a good word regarding Gove and the history curriculum. We've mentioned, I mean, one of my things which I've talked about with history, when we've got history, haven't we, and stories in history, but one which I like is hyperinflation. In Weimar Germany, and hyperinflation can be quite a complex concept for students to get their head around in terms of how it affects different groups. And when I teach hyperinflation, I always tell them the stories of a family who burn the banknotes because it's cheaper than buying fuel. But you know, the adults who are queuing up to buy bread with our wheelbarrow full of banknotes, and then they hand over a wheelbarrow and discard the notes because the wheelbarrow is worth more, and the kids who are making kites out of discarded banknotes. You know, it makes it stick, and you just give them those stories and they're memorable, and it makes it stick, and it helps to defeat the limits of working memory. And I think working memory is quite an important barrier when we're thinking about effective teaching talk. So how do we stop working memory from being overloaded during an explanation? Shuna, any ideas about that? How do we stop working memory from being overloaded during explanations? Thank you so much, Henry. See you later.
That's a big question, Tom. But we're really talking cognitive load theory there. So how to condense that into a short answer? My goodness.
We've got 10 minutes left of the show. Take your time.
I won't take your whole 10 minutes. It's about planning, I think. When you're structuring the talk of something very complex, perhaps I'm thinking in biology of planning a lesson or 2 lessons on protein synthesis, let's say, you need to make it clear, to make that teacher talk clear, you need to think about their prior knowledge. So that kind of foundation of what they're going to come in with. So considering that, making sure you've activated it, set anything straight before you build on top of it with that more complex content. So that's one thing, prior knowledge. Then making sure the sequencing, I guess, is really clear, and that you're giving them just a bit of volume at once, not too much. So for example, this year, with it being remotely taught, I made my protein synthesis lessons very different. I just taught them RNA first, a molecule, before I then taught them the rest of the process, just so that it was a bit more bite-sized chunks. So yeah, in that way, my teacher explanation was not too big a volume, if that makes sense. Yeah. So those 2 things can really help, prior knowledge and sequencing it in small steps. That's very Rosenshine's principles. Those would be 2 good things to look at, I think, with explanations.
Brilliant, thanks, Shuna. Jasmine, what about you? How best can we deal with the barrier of working memory when it comes to teacher talk?
In addition to what Shuna was saying, I think also just doing like quick scripts of what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. When I first started teaching, I would kind of just run through my lesson in my head and say like, okay, I know I'm going to do this. And then I'd get up to say what I wanted to say. And then my words would start like tripping over themselves. And so what I started doing this year instead was just like writing a quick, writing out what I wanted to say, or clearing out my thoughts on like the speaker notes in my Google Slides, because we were also remote. And I feel like that helped me be clear with my own explanation. So then I knew that students were able to see my explanations clear, rather than like kind of by the seat of my pants. Trousers. Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. We might have a translate function on Podbean. I don't know. But yeah, no. Scripting explanations, I think that's really important, and condensing it down and making them concise, and not droning on, because then the working memory just gets overloaded if you're just going on a bit too much. Sheena and Jasmine, really, really good to hear from you. Thanks so much for coming on. And I'm sure, Jasmine, it's your second time on one of my shows, so I'm sure we'll get you on soon and again. And Sheena, thanks for coming on. And yeah, see you on Monday.
Pleasure. Yeah, see you on Monday. Cheers, Tom.
See you later.
See you, Jasmine.
Thanks so much there to Shuna Neve and to Jasmine Lane, who have been calling in to share their stories and tell us about effective teacher talk. You can follow Jasmine on Twitter at Ms. Jasmine MN. That is MS Jasmine MN. And you can follow Shuna on Twitter. Let me just find her at Shuna Neve. Perfect. We had an anonymous direct message from somebody who said they were told they spoke too much at the start of their lesson for their final NQT observation just a couple of weeks ago. We don't know the context. We don't know how long they spoke for. They might have addressed the class for 45 minutes without stopping or taking a breath, or maybe just for 5 minutes. We don't know the full story. So we can't pass judgment on the observer. What we do know, though, is that from that, the amount of teacher talk is still being commented upon in observations in 2021. The funniest response I got was from Tom Wood at Tom DWW, who has been told to limit their teacher talk all the time, and we are still told this. I think that senior management believe in some kind of platonic amnesis where pupils can discover the course material hidden deep within their own souls. And that spoke to me because it made me think about my year 13 history lessons when I was at school on the Cold War. We had a wonderful teacher. I think he retired at the end of last year. Really knowledgeable, real expert who taught us what we needed to know about the Cold War. And then when we got to détente, we were told to take a particular part of it and plan a presentation around it and teach the rest of the class. Now, you'd think we're 17, 18 years old. We have the maturity, we have the capacity to do that. But, you know, we weren't experts. Some of us, not me though, some of us weren't very hardworking, and the quality of instruction was just not as good as if it had been delivered by our expert teacher. Now, I'm not saying don't do that ever. I think there is real benefit to having students teach each other as part of revision strategies, but in a complicated part of an A-level course, as many history teachers will know, I think it's probably best that it comes from a teacher themselves and the expert in the room. I'm going to talk through some of your tweets. So here goes. At Nia and the Poems said, in 2012, I left teaching after an inset in which we were told under no circumstances should you allow an Ofsted inspector to catch you talking to your class. I went to adult ed and didn't think I'd ever come back, but I did come back, and now I'm a head of department. I talk to my classes. David Ash at Mr. I History 93 replied that he was advised once to limit what I say to no more than 10 words per task and leave instructions in the form of images on the board and let the pupils work it out for themselves. And this got a reply from Dr. Polly Duxfield at Polly Duxfield, which said, who needs 10 whole words? I only explain activities in the form of interpretive dance. A previous guest on Teachers Talk Radio, one of my guests, Nikki McGee, said that she was told that her students were too dependent on her for knowledge, and maybe they could discover the finer details of virtue ethics without her in an A-level observation 5 years ago. And I think that links back to what I was just said about an A-level student in particular needing that expert teacher. Just because they've studied a subject for more years than somebody else, it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, for curriculum's progression model, they still need that expert teacher there to help them through and to teach them the material. But that's not a fair reflection of the variety of responses that we did have to that. And sometimes, you know, you have to adapt your teaching to account for those in front of you. At Teachers Talk Radio, we have a variety of views, and here's some of the other side as well. All of the Rainbows at Costa Friday tweeted that she was limited to 3.5 minutes inputs as a trainee, but this was in a nursery school, and it was actually a very effective way to focus on what was important. I talk more these days, but I'm inclined to make a conscious choice to do so because of my old training, I suppose. So yeah, make it concise, and just because our talk isn't being timed anymore, or in some cases it is, it doesn't mean we should be explaining things in a roundabout way. Mr. E At V Everett NFL gave us an interesting reply that I thought about. It challenged my own thinking, which I think is ideal for Teachers Talk Radio. He said, the current abandonment of curiosity, thinking, and links to people's own evolving understanding are also a dead end. I'd like to see people questioning the current fads as much as they scorn the previous ones. And if people are bad at working together and working independently, there's an argument that you need to work on those things, not abandon them. Would love to hear from people who are flooding into a studio at the moment about what you think about that. Maureen Cronin replied, 30% teacher talk is ideal, broken into 3 chunks. I observe great teachers every day. Most talk too much. Now, I did say earlier, we shouldn't prescribe a certain amount of teacher talk in a lesson. And so initially I was a little bit dubious, but then I read the follow-up and I thought, yeah, I agree with this. But 30% is a guide to remind us to shut up already and let the kids do most of the work. They need to practice, edit, tinker, talk, think for themselves. And that links really nicely into what Shuna, Jasmine and Henry were talking about. And Mr. Greenwood told us finally, while training, he was told 5 minutes in every 20, learn to hold lessons of clueless kids following pointless instructions. A stupid thing to say. Teacher explanations of difficult concepts is critical to good teaching. Also asking lots of questions to check understanding, which I think links in brilliantly to the conversation we just had. So that is the key stuff. I think we've got some really good key takeaways about effective teacher talk. Of course, do let me know after the show what you think makes teacher talk effective and how much teacher talk is too much teacher talk. You can reply to our tweet, which already has loads of interactions. Tweet us directly at TTRadio2021 or tweet me directly at HB_history. It has been a lovely discussion today. I've really enjoyed it. I am not hosting next week. Unfortunately, I won't be around, but I will be back in 2 weeks' time. And I plan to analyse the Ofsted Research Review into geography. I am a history teacher, but I think it's really important that we think about other subjects and think about the links between our subject and other subjects and help to raise the profile of other subjects in our own thinking. Our classroom is not an island. I'm looking for 4 guests to discuss this on the 3rd of July for the whole show. I've done similar shows before on non-specialist topics like the model music curriculum and the Ofsted Research Review into RE. I will read up. I want to hear from you. After me today, we have Sam Elliott with the Twilight Show from 6 p.m. talking about intelligent accountability, amongst other things. Then it's Sobia Iqbal on Sunday morning at 9 a.m, Graham Collum at 11 a.m, and Khalil Rouse at 1 p.m. 3 very different presenters, but 3 fantastic shows. And I would urge you to tune in and talk it out with them. That's it from me today. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Enjoy the Euros if you're into your football, and keep on tuning in and talking it out. See you later.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.